isn't happening in our school districts, what we need to do to move forward to help strengthen the instruction of reading in our school districts. At this time, I will ask, does anyone have a bill introduction for the Senate?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, and Vice Chairs and Ranking Members and Committee members. I'm Kelly Warren. I'm the Senator who represents Senate District 11. Thank you for allowing me to make a bill introduction today. It's exciting to get to do it in front of the Senate and the House as well. I do have a Senate bill. It is 24 RS 2366, and it concerns emergency response policies, and it's a bill that was also introduced in the House earlier this week, and I'll stand for any questions. I'm not used to being on this side of the podium, but.
Senators, do you have any questions? Do I have a motion to accept it as a committee bill? So moved. Motion from Senator Erickson. Do I have a second? Second from Senator Gossage. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Are there any other introductions for the Senate? Seeing none, I will call on the chair of the House.
Are there any House requests for bill introductions? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an introduction for a House Bill 24 RS 2325. Last year, Representative Murphy introduced a CTE bill, which required schools to pay for the costs of CTE tests for students to obtain an industry credential. And basically, that bill last year passed in a modified form where we required the schools to pay for the cost of the CTE test, but we didn't actually reimburse the schools for the cost of the test like the original bill did. And the lady who requested that bill be introduced asked me to introduce it in its original form where we would actually reimburse the schools for the cost of the test. And so that's what this bill does.
All right. Any objection from House members? Very good. Bill is introduced. Thank you. Any other bill introductions from House members? Very good. Bill introductions is closed.
Okay, thank you so much. So appreciate those of you that joined us today. We know there was confusion about where we were meeting. That didn't get fixed until, just a couple hours ago. But just so you know, next Tuesday, when we meet again jointly, it will be in this room. So at this time, I would like to call on Dr. Curtis.
Hello, chairs, members of the committee. My name is Lori Curtis. I'm the Early Literacy Dyslexia Program Manager at the Kansas State Department of Education. And I'm really grateful that I have this opportunity to talk to you today. I want you to know before I even get started that the work I'm going to talk to you about that we've been accomplished, I was exactly almost a year ago that I was here. It's not just done by me, it's done by a team of people that help me. All of them are practicing educators. Excuse me, they're all with students right now, and I have their names listed at the top of the document that I provided. I also want to tell you how excited I am that I'm here to kind of talk about some basic definitions of terms that we use in our conversations. We see them on media, because I do feel there's really some confusion about how these terms are used. So I'm going to provide some of that clarification about how we use them in our schools and in the professional learning I do in schools and my team does. And then I'm hoping that I will be able to have plenty of time afterwards for any questions that you might have. Excuse me. Knowing that some of these topics would be enough for a 3-hour graduate course, I will try to give you overview information and that's detailed enough that you'll be able to answer or ask questions that you would like me to answer. I'm going to start with a definition of the science of reading. Excuse me. And I'm doing this, and I've actually started a lot of my professional learning this year with that definition. Because I want all of us to understand what we're talking about when we discuss the science of reading. So I'm going to just read this. I won't read this handout I've provided, but I would like to read this for those who might not have it in front of them and are listening in. The science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. This research has been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world and is derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. The science of reading has culminated in a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop, why some have difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach, and therefore improve student outcomes through prevention and intervention for reading difficulties. So the science of reading is not a curriculum. It is not a fad, and it's not a single element like phonics that we can just add to what we are teaching, the curriculum that we might be using. It's a body of research. It's peer-reviewed, and it's research from mainly neuroscience, education, and psychology. It's about how we know the brain learns to read, what happens physically as children learn to read, and then also it informs the best methods we use to teach and assess those students. The science of reading will continue to change. It will continue to change as more research is completed, more evidence is examined. The science of research speaks more to just decoding. It's greater than just decoding words. It involves both reading and writing. It involves rich vocabulary learning and knowledge building. This is information that starts at birth with that first conversation we have with children. It's grounded in the world of that child that's enhanced with our early literacy and early childhood programs. And it's also enhanced through that important content instruction we provide in our schools with teaching social studies, math, science, the arts, English language arts. All of that is found within that science of reading broad definition. So as you look at this definition, there might be some words that stand out to you, piqued your interest. 5 decades. I often get the question, it's 5 decades. Why are we just now the last 10 years or so hearing about this? Well, part of that is the fact that we've had incredible advances in technology. Now that we can see functional MRIs of children who are reading and see what's really happening in their brains has informed us, as have eye movement studies, where we actually can see what a child's focusing on as they're learning to read. Because in the past, what we thought happened is what we could observe. When I sat down with a child, when I see the child's behavior based on what I'm doing, I'm trying to guess what's going on as that child is learning to read. Unfortunately, sometimes what we think is happening isn't what's happening. And this science of reading has told us a different story. At one time, it was thought that students learned words in whole units, and we taught using flashcards, memorized spelling lists, whole word methods. And now we know from that eye movement research that that isn't what happens, that children attend to individual letters and individual sounds. And so we need to reflect that in the way that we're teaching. Even as an adult reader, as I'm reading this on my notes, I'm still attending to individual letters and sounds, but we get so quick at doing that, it feels like it's magic, or it feels like I'm absorbing it directly off the page in a whole word method, when actually I can differentiate between closely linked words by looking at those individual letters and sounds as I'm thinking about what I'm reading. We used to also think that just exposing kids to wonderful text is what we needed to do to set the stage for successful reading. But again, the science has informed us, because while it is very important for children to be exposed, it's not enough. It is not enough for our children to just be read to and surrounded by great books and fun stories. It takes intentional instruction for most children to make that connection between letters and sounds and meaning and the way a word is spelled and the context in which it's used. It doesn't come automatically. Research will show us our teaching methods need to reflect that. We need to draw a child's attention to individual letters, the way letters work together. Vowel teams, digraphs, diphthongs, all of those things need to be intentionally taught. We have to teach the way our language works to our children. And while some children can acquire these concepts quite easily, many do not. They need explicit, systematic, cumulative teaching in order to be able to comprehend what they're reading. Until the science of reading helped us understand things like that detail, that orthographic mapping of how words sound, how they're spelled, the meaning that they have, we didn't realize how important it was for us to teach children to break this code. We thought that if we could just give kids the right hints at the right time, they would be able to figure this thing out. The system of cues that teachers used appeared to be helpful, but now we know through the science of reading that they are actually the strategies or cues that poor readers rely on. They're cues that draw students' attention away from individual letters, the sounds that those letters make, and encourages them to guess at words they don't know. You may have heard of this as 3 cueing. I would imagine that many of us in this room who've sat next to a child of yours, a grandchild, a young child learning to read, have probably, with the very best of intentions, gravitated right to the 3 cueing system. So what does that look like? And for those of you who might not know what we're talking about when we talk about 3 cueing, I want to describe it to you. If you're sitting with a child and they come to a word they don't know, and you're sitting with them and you say, you know what? Look at that first word, honey. You know this word. We've done this. What do you think it might be? Give it a go. Asking a child to predict on very little information and make a guess is part of the 3 cueing system. When a child, especially it happens when we use very predictive stories, leveled text, when we have a child who is reading a very predictable book and they don't know a word, if we say, oh, look at that picture, that's going to give you a good clue for this word. When we encourage a child to take their eyes from the letters and sounds and direct them to a picture, it's part of that 3 cueing system. When we ask a child to predict a word based on the part of speech, boy, that snow is really blank. You know, I would be looking for an adjective. If it's a W word, it might be wild or wet or wonderful. But rather than drawing a child's attention to every letter and sound so they truly learn the code, I'm cueing them to use other information, the part of speech. We do this because it feels like it works. And for a while, with kindergartners, I'm a former recovering kindergarten teacher. It feels like it works. It looks like it works. But when you look at the science of reading, what we know is that as words get more complex and longer, become multisyllabic, and pictures go away at 2nd, 3rd grade, texts get longer, a child's ability to guess fails them. And if we have not taken the time to teach explicitly and intentionally those letters and sound connections so they can decode, they will not have the skills they need to be a fluent reader unless they have been able to figure it out along the way or had an incredible teacher help them make this connection. So 3Qing isn't inherently an awful thing. I've done it. Maybe you've done it sitting next to a child you love, but it isn't the way we need to teach reading. But I don't think it's very helpful for us to say, don't do this, without explaining what you should do instead, which is actually the work that I do at KSDE. The team that I work with, our work has been all year about helping everyone in the state that works with children understand what do we do instead of these practices that we used to do that we now know from the science of reading don't work. One more idea about that 3Qing. Sometimes we think it's okay to just get close with a word. If a child is reading and the word is silly and the word is sassy and they say silly and we're like, that's pretty close. Close doesn't count in reading because they're going to come to words that they need to know that need to be accurate. And our goal as teachers is to build accurate and fluent readers that can comprehend a text. So I would like to just let you know that when we have enough cues with a certain type of text, we can coax children into guessing words. But that isn't what will sustain them as a reader as they move on throughout our schools. So there is a more effective model for teaching reading. It's based on the science of reading. It does not encourage the 3Qing system, and we call it structured literacy. It has very clearly defined elements and principles. I provided you with a handout for that today. The handout that you have does provide you with the components and the principles of structured literacy. And you'll see on the handout that I provided that structured literacy is very comprehensive in that it explains both not just what we teach. You'll see on one side, it gives you the components, phonemes, graphemes, morphology, all of what we teach. You take that along with our Kansas standards to know specifically at what grade level those things are taught. So it's what we teach. But what's so great about this is it also provides the how you teach it. It's the art and the science. It's the content and the pedagogy for teaching. So that handout I provided you discusses both sides, the elements and the principles of structured literacy, and also where those things might occur. And you'll see at the top on the left, the most important part of this equation is in a general education classroom, and then as additional supports are needed, more intensive interventions are provided. So structured literacy refers to the explicit, systematic, diagnostic, and cumulative approach to teaching literacy that acknowledges the value of both word recognition and oral and written comprehension as evidenced in all grades and all disciplines. That's the KSDE definition we're using for structured literacy. And what I would just like to highlight is that sometimes in that misunderstanding, we think, oh, structured literacy, that's just that K2 thing, or that's that kindergarten first grade thing. But if you look at that handout, you'll see, yep, phonemes and graphemes. That means letters and sounds. And you might see syllables and stress. Yeah, we do a lot of that in kindergarten first grade. But when you look at vocabulary and literary knowledge, understanding text structure, our students who are having science education, social studies instruction, they all need to have rigorous vocabulary instruction that is built along with their discipline. So kind of to recap, structured literacy and the science of reading, it's not one technique. It is not a specific curriculum or a single element or component of instruction like phonics. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. it is responsive to data. That data is based on students, and students are unique. It relies on the professional wisdom of teachers, of educators and administrators, and it is the work that I feel is the work of my team and the others that I work with at KSDE. At KSDE, my role is to help our educators make the very best decisions they can make to increase literacy learning, because literacy is key to reducing the limitations that they have, which might keep them from reaching their full potential. So as I move on to that, I'm really excited and happy to tell you that at KSDE, we've prioritized 4 fundamentals that will be the work of a lot of us in the agency, and I'm one of those, of many that will be working on this. Those essential fundamentals will provide the framework for school improvement and accreditation for all our schools across the state. All 4 of those fundamentals fully support the initiatives that we have in Kansas to increase literacy learning for all students, including those with dyslexia, and will be the focus of all of our supports from here forward. One of those fundamentals is structured literacy. The second fundamental is standards alignment, making sure that all of our materials and our practices are aligned with what our Kansas standards say kids in Kansas should know and be able to do. That should be at every grade level and every specific content area. This past summer, under the leadership of Joanne McCrell, we revised the Kansas English Language Arts Standards, which now reflect structured literacy as a model of instruction in the standards. The third fundamental is a balanced assessment system. No one piece of data is going to provide a comprehensive view of teaching and learning, but assessments all have specific purposes. Our universal screeners are essential in helping us find students who are at risk for reading difficulty. Diagnostics that we use that follow up from those screeners further our knowledge till we know how to help. Our state assessments are essential for seeing if students have mastered their grade level standards of a specific content. We must use multiple measures to gain a clear picture of where to go next. The fourth fundamental is high quality instruction. Carefully chosen materials and highly skilled teachers, it's critical. That professional knowledge is built with the support of the agency experts at KSDE or through our projects such as letters training. And with this guidance, districts can make more informed decisions regarding curriculum and assessments. And in such work, learn what to do when it comes to selecting practices to avoid things such as 3Qing. To provide our K-12 educators support in moving forward with the state's initiatives this year, our agency has received approval to conduct a comprehensive curriculum audit across the state. That is what will help us identify what resources districts are using now and how we can develop additional support for district leadership and educators in making important decisions as they seek to do what's best for all kids. We've also expanded our opportunity for letters training throughout the state to include teachers beyond grade 3 and also to include administrators. The other items that are on this handout that I've provided for you are kind of a list of things, some of the things that our team has accomplished that I wanted just to give you updates on. We have revised the Kansas Dyslexia Handbook to reflect the new screening protocols. We've provided a more detailed flow chart for assessments for districts to use in updated language. We know it's an important document that all schools need to be using, and we wanted to make sure it was updated and kept current. We have revised the KSDE screening protocol to be reflective as to what makes sense for educators, but also gives us the best data. We do continue to screen all kids, kindergarten through grade 8, again in fall of 9th grade, with then opportunities to exit screening if there's been no risk determined. We also have provided support for districts in answering questions for the Every Child Can Read Act. We've revised those initial 6 hours of required dyslexia training that all new teachers get, and those are being recorded and provided for starting up this coming fall. That way, the most important and updated information for screening is included in those. We've revised, as I mentioned earlier, the English language arts standards to be very clear about how structured literacy is included in those. I have started holding meetings with our Literacy Advisory Council, which are its members across the state. It includes parents, administrators, large districts, small districts, elementary, secondary, speech language pathologists, reading specialists. There's a wide lens on this, and I meet with them 4 times a year to make sure they understand, here are changes that we're thinking about, please provide feedback. How could we make this work better? And things like our screening protocol change, the dyslexia handbook, all of that as discussed at those meetings. We've created a structured literacy checklist tool, which we provided in presentation at the KSDE Fall Conference to provide districts with leadership as to what structured literacy needs to look like within the classroom, so that they can, if they're being supervised by someone and observed, we know exactly what that might look like. We've also provided a short webinar for that. And then I think some of the most important work that my team does is we consult individually when districts have questions, need help, understanding what their data is showing, what supports are available for KSDE. We meet one-on-one with them for that, or in a small group virtually. Professional learning opportunities throughout the state are not provided only by my team, but my team is the one that usually takes the lead with literacy, early literacy and dyslexia. But all of our program managers are providing that strong grade level teaching and professional learning for educators across the state. In higher education, which is also part of my job, I am very happy to let you know that the pre-K through grade 6 standards just went before the State Board of Education this week. They'll be voted upon next month, which completely revise the English language arts portion and provide that into 3 standards. The first of those, it's actually standard 5, is theoretical and foundational knowledge of literacy, which includes the science of reading. There is also a standard that is specific to structured literacy, the elements and principles. And another one of the standards is about assessment and meeting the needs of diverse learners, which is called out to explicitly support our students with dyslexia. I've also received assurance forms from every, and I'll go back about that PK through 6 standard work that I did. The team that worked on that included Board of Regents institution, faculty, and private institutions, classroom teachers. There was a wide range, and it was really wonderful to meet with this group. Everyone was on the same page. There was not pushback at changing this at all, and they were in support of our new standards. I have received updated assurance forms from all institutions, including the syllabi that are used in their programs. I participate when they come through the review process to make sure they are doing, meeting the standard for the science of reading. And then also we do have faculty that are participating in letters training. Quite a few have done that on their own independently, and some are working through a state or a state cohort. So I'm very excited about the work that we're doing at KSDE and the focused work we have ahead of us with the 4 fundamentals, one of which is structured literacy. We all have a part to play in doing what's best for kids, our parents, community members, educators, public servants. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for this opportunity for me to share what I'm passionate about. Because I truly believe that literacy changes lives. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much. And so committee, we will just kind of, if you've got a question, raise your hand, but I think we'll just kind of work around the horseshoe, if you don't mind. So we'll go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You talked a little bit about staff support for the letters training that's out there now with the teachers provided through the department. Is that correct? Was I understanding that?
We offer letters training, yes.
Yes.
Through funding from KSDE.
And then once those teachers are trained, do you have staff that go out and ensure they're teaching it correctly?
The way that should look should be included in these fundamentals, because the way they implement letters training will be reflected in how they are implementing structured literacy in their classroom. So that will be part of our continuing support.
So does that mean you're looking at them after they've taught? Why wouldn't you do that while they're teaching? Or why wouldn't you catch that while they're teaching?
It would be while they're teaching.
Okay,
Their classroom practice to make sure it's implemented, yeah.
okay. And if one other question is, once this is all pretty well implemented across the state, how will the department measure the success? I know we have percentages of students that are in levels 1, 2, 3, or 4, but is there a measure that the department will have for those students?
Kind of going back to what I said, it will take multiple measures. So we'll continue to look at our screening data, but we'll also look at state assessment data. And when schools provide their information through their accreditation and their reporting at the end of the year, structured literacy will be something that will be looked at, and that will be reflected in how they're implementing their letters training, if you're meaning the specific to letters training, or how teachers are teaching reading.
Okay, I think I understand. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Cossage?
Just very quickly, your words were very touching to this former elementary school teacher and mother of a dyslexic son. I can tell you really know your stuff. One of the things that you began by saying it's not a curriculum, but it sounds like it kind of is. So what other facets are we using besides the letters curriculum?
Well, letters isn't a curriculum you use with children. Letters is a professional learning, comprehensive professional learning for teachers over 2 years where they practice and embed that. So it can be used with any curriculum that your district is using, right? So that's why structured literacy is how you teach and what you need to be teaching, but it isn't your specific curriculum if you're using Wonders or you're using CKLA or you're using an actual curriculum.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. That's all I had. Thank you so much.
Senator?
Thank you. And Kelly, thank you for being here. Just now you said that it's a methodology. It's not a curriculum itself in structured literacy. But as I'm very much interested in early childhood education, and so as a part of this, then also, as you mentioned at the very beginning, talking about how much we have learned over the last 10 to 15 years about the learning process and about brain development. So is there any piece of that embedded in this structured literacy?
There is, and I'm really excited you said that. We also have letters for early childhood, which is a 1-year training that teachers can go through. But one of the most, to me, interesting pieces of research is the important, and I've known this, but it's great to see the research about the importance of oral language development. Our children have to come with strong oral language because that's the foundation for their reading. And we know that we have more students coming now who are nonverbal, who have weak language skills, and we need to make sure we have teachers and families that understand how to help build that up in our early childhood classrooms, as well as just parent information that's out there, because that's the foundation for their reading. Because if you can have heard a word and you know a word in your oral vocabulary, it's going to be easier for you to read that word. And so there is a connection with what we do in early childhood. We had, I would love for all of you to go to the page that I manage at KSDE, because we did these 2 wonderful webinars with Dr. Suzanne Adloff, who's a researcher in oral language and worked with Hugh Katz and Tiffany Hogan in some of the work in early oral language work. And what they were finding is that children who struggled and were found early to need speech or language services even before they got into school, and they received services, and they got into kindergarten, and they were doing a great job decoding. So they were released from their services. They met their goals. They found that about 3rd grade, they fell apart in reading. They went back, and they could say, well, these were the kids that had language difficulty as a 3 and a 4-year-old. The decoding wasn't the problem. It's the language. Because if we, again, this goes back, I could talk forever about this, you'll find. So there's the simple view of reading, which is we need word recognition and we need language comprehension. And if either of those are a 0, it's like a multiplication problem, you get 0. We get 0 reading comprehension. So that oral language, and that starts at birth. That oral language is a critical piece for how well our kids are going to do in reading. And so, yes, early childhood, the importance of oral language is in that. And because my title is Early Literacy and Dyslexia, that's part of the work that my team does.
Okay, I am going to jump to Representative Hill because he's flagging me down. So we're going to, so I'm going to turn to my right and go ahead.
I didn't get it on. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the presentation. The big hole that is quickly being filled up in Kansas by your work and your team is to be applauded. I want to focus a little bit more on the dyslexia component that you talked about. Dyslexia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it tends to be decoding issues. And when you talked about dyslexia teachers, you mentioned 6 hours of training, and that kind of hit me a little bit weak, I guess. Would you agree with that? Or, I mean, dyslexia is a pretty complex deal, and the decoding process becomes incredibly more complex for dyslexic students. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Exactly. There are 6 hours of required initial training that every brand new teacher who's coming to Kansas or someone who's just out of college must have to make sure they have that foundational knowledge. And then we require annual training. They continue to get training, and some are doing letters training as well. So that isn't all the training that they would have. They would also, because it is now required in our higher education institutions, to make sure they're addressing the science of reading. So our teachers come with a base of knowledge, but we make sure with that 6 hours of required training that they understand that foundational piece. So those modules, the first one is specific to what is dyslexia. How do we define it? How do we look for that? What is dyslexia? The second module is how does the brain learn to read? Like, how does this phonological processing and mapping occur? The third is specific to structured literacy, and it's both at the elementary and there will be modules at the secondary level. What does that look like in a middle school or a secondary classroom when I have students that are struggling? I need to make sure that I understand how to meet their needs. The fourth is using data. How do we use our data to know what to do next and to progress monitor that to make sure it's working? And then the fifth is what are the specific requirements that KSDE requires you to do? And then also who are the district contacts? Who do you go to in your building when you have questions? It's more of a template for those individual school districts when they're providing that training to utilize. So that's what those 6 hours of training. That training is Sometimes it can be done in a one type of a day, but it's usually done throughout the year with lots of other additional resources, which you also can find at the webpage that I manage. So you're correct. 6 hours isn't going to be all that they would need.
Can I follow up on that? Is the science of reading trained instructor able to replace a special ed instructor when in a dyslexic situation, or do they work together, or how does that work?
I think it would depend on the training for the professional learning that either one has, the credentials that those individuals have, and the needs of the student. If 1 in 5 children are somewhere on that continuum with dyslexia, that general classroom teacher is going to have a lot of those kids. A lot of kids with dyslexia are not identified for special ed, nor should they be. They have their needs. If we can make sure we have all of our teachers using structured literacy and doing what they need to do, they will receive great instruction there. And if they need additional supports, we have our multi-tiered system support to provide that. And then there are students that don't respond and need different education. And then those are the ones that would be put forward to be evaluated for special education. But those teachers would all work as a team and meet together and make those decisions based on the needs of a child. That's why it's so important that everyone understands how to look at the data and know how best to help kids.
Thank you very much, and thanks for what you do.
Sure.
I have Representative Younger, then I have Senator Erickson, and then I have Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Curtis. You kind of touched on this for a minute, but the university training, I think you use the term base of knowledge. Is that one class or maybe just a lesson or something, do you know?
They have it'd be more than one class. They have standards to meet, but we have added on those licensures. There is a set of standards that they must be teaching certain things, like those theoretical pieces of Scarborough's rope, the 4-part language processing model. There are specifics as to what needs to be taught, and then they provide a syllabi. So sometimes that is in one course that might be attached to a practicum where students are out working with students. But it doesn't have to be, they could have multiple courses to provide that knowledge as long as they're meeting that standard.
Thank you. And do you know, is there any training offered to the transition to teaching teachers or any of those other programs that involve people with degrees that are going back to school to be teachers? Is this a part of that training also?
Yes, those also come through. So those new programs, when they're reviewed to be put forward, they also meet the expectations for the science of reading standard.
Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here and for your presentation. I, too, am encouraged at the effort and think it is a very positive step in the right direction. Pulaski once said, without the skill of reading, children will almost certainly have limited academic, economic, social, and even emotional success in school and in later life. Would you agree with that statement?
I would.
My question is, can all children, absent some exceptionality that would explain why, obtain at least a functional level of literacy, given the right instruction and opportunity?
If I would, and I can't quote the research, right now they're saying about 95% can, but again, you talked about the different needs or different abilities of students. I'm really hopeful in that number, because as technology improves, as we provide additional supports for students, I think we'll find that we can meet the needs of more and more and more students. And if there's one thing I want all teachers and all people across our state to know, especially when we're working with our kids with dyslexia, is that slow reading does not mean slow thinking. We have to raise our expectations for the amazing things our students can do, even when they struggle with reading.
I appreciate that, and I don't mean to interrupt, but for the sake of time, I do have a couple more, and I know there are others with lots of questions. So 95%, and dyslexia, we are well aware of those issues. Where are we at currently in Kansas with the percent of students who are reading at an acceptable level?
I didn't bring numbers with me based on grade levels and screening data. I don't have
Are we,
that.
I would assume we're not at 95%.
No.
Okay. You're familiar with the education adage that teachers, it's a mantra that teachers, all of us who've been in education, can finish this when I start it. Wait a year or two, and this too shall pass, right? Because we've seen how it's very tempting in education to jump on the latest trend. I would propose that's exactly how we got whole language. And it didn't take research for those of us who were living that to sound the alarm and say, this isn't working. This is not working. Whole language is not working. And we lost a whole generation, in my opinion, because of that. And so my question is, I believe that this is good, solid, it's going to help our students. How do we know that this too shall not pass when the latest, greatest reading white paper hits the shelves, and then we switch gears and then get sidetracked and lose another generation of readers? That's my concern. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Did you want to respond to that, or?
I will just go back to the fact that we have to follow the science. And right now it's very clear that those methods that you mentioned that now we know we can't wait, they didn't work. We have evidence to show what does work. But also that idea that just wait and this will pass, that's not good enough. Like, we intervene as soon as we see risk, which is why we've established the dyslexia screener. So the idea of waiting, because we know dyslexia is lifelong. We can't wait. We need to help intervene as quickly as we can to see what gains we can make when the optimal time is to do it. So that would be my
Okay, Senator
response.
Straub and then Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Curtis, for all the great information. I understand the 5 components of the science of reading, and I appreciate all of the work that the Department of Education is doing with that. My question is, have they looked at the effect of infant and early childhood nutrition on brain development in developing their reading skills?
I'm so fascinated by what you just said, and I know where those people work in my building, so we'll go have a conversation. But yeah, thank you.
If I may follow up, I know that certain proteins and fats are critical to brain development. And as a private homeschooler, I had all 3 of my daughters reading before the age of kindergarten, most of them reading before the age of 3, and just using basic phonics, really just using things that were easily at my disposal as a homeschooler. So nothing special, nothing, no intricate science of reading program, which I really appreciate. And I think I thank you for all of the work that you do with this. But if you don't put gas in your car, the engine's not going to run properly. So I would like to see, and I know that the Department of Education has put a lot into breakfast programs and lunch programs, but we have to make sure that what they're getting in those meals is actually fueling their brain properly. Thank you.
Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here. You did a wonderful job. I've been on the dyslexia task force for a number of years, so thank you. A quick question about the screening tools. So are those screening tools free to districts, or do they have to purchase them, the dyslexia screening tools?
There is a contract, which I'm not a budget person, that is assisting with FastBridge right now. But districts can choose to use the approved screeners we have approved that provide the subtests of what they upload certain sub-test scores to us or benchmark measures. So that is a district expense after this contract with FastBridge is passed.
Okay, so maybe at some point in time we can get some more information on that contract, maybe. Do you think, Madam Chair?
Absolutely. And so committee, the Senate needs to be on the floor in 7 minutes. So I'm going to just kind of help wrap us up a little bit. Obviously, there are those of you that have questions that didn't get to ask them yet. I kind of have a list of questions. But there's information that, additional information that we know that we want to receive. And I think, as we are looking at funding, And as we are looking at the needs for this training for our teachers, one of the things that we really need to be able to do is to quantify. So I think it's important for us to be able to know if the Department of Education can help find some preliminary information with regard to how many teachers do we have in our school districts that have actually completed letters training? How many teachers in Kansas do we have that are licensed right now that we believe are going to need to have training in letters? Can we figure out where we are as far as folks that have from K or pre-K through third grade that have any background with the structured literacy? And then where are we with those that are the rest of the elementary, middle school, high school? Because at this point, we do not know, as legislators, do we have a district where they have exactly what you had kind of made reference to, and that was that we have dyslexia specialists that actually have the credentials that are needed, that we have SPED teachers that have the credentials with dyslexia, that we have those general ed teachers that have any of that training. And I can tell you, part of the concern, knowing what has happened in one particular school district, there was such a need where hundreds of kids were identified as being reading deficient. They decided to start at the middle school, have interventions at the elementary. They didn't have a solution for the high school. So we kind of need to know where we are in those different types of building. The other thing is, for those of you that attended, sorry, I need to type this in so I can see it again, but attended the interim education committee meetings, Blake Flanders, executive director of KBOR, presented that there were structured literacy training that occurred for teachers in the state, that 800 teachers completed the modules and 1,600 hours of training were logged. So do a simple math, and that was 2 hours of training. So what training was received in those 2 hours of structured literacy? Because we know that 120 districts, education co-op centers, and parochial schools were involved. So can we start to be looking at a Kansas map where districts are located, and where are those that are green that they've got a pretty solid foundation on this and are moving forward, and where are those bright red lights? And so if we could start on some of that preliminary information, that would be helpful. But also, I know that as you were listening, those are not the questions that I'd come up with, but those of you that are listening, please email your questions that you have for Dr. Curtis and her team. To, if you're senators, please send it to our committee assistant. If you're House members, send it to your committee assistant. And please try and get that done, if you can get it done by tomorrow morning, so that Dr. Curtis doesn't, we're not going to have you spend your weekend answering this. But next Tuesday.
I think I'll be iced in anyway, so.
There we go. But next Tuesday when we meet, if we have some answers, you know, here's the question and we have some answers, then we can start reviewing that. But just so you know, so you get this little essence of what's happening on Tuesday, we are going to have some teachers that are here. They're going to share their experiences after the training in the classroom. I think we're going to have maybe a parent come and explain the experience. But I do think if you also, one other question or request would be, if you have a couple links where people can watch how that instruction in the classroom kind of is appearing, even if it's just at an elementary grade level. But if folks could see an example of it, I think that might be helpful. Would that be helpful to some of you to see that?
I will do all I can to answer that. I won't be able to answer any of the information related to the Kansas Board of Regents models because that wasn't done in collaboration with me.
So they did it,
So they can
but
provide
not
you
in
with that.
collaboration.
They
So
can
we don't know the
provide,
content.
they can provide the information on the content and what that,
Okay,
the number of teachers that.
I'll make that request. So
Provided.
you don't even know what teachers completed? See? We all need to be talking so that we know what they completed, who they are, and what they actually completed.
I'm sure they have record of that. I don't.
Well, it would help if you knew that record, and we'll move on from there. Committee, thank you so much. Sorry for the confusion of the location. We do meet here next Tuesday at 1:30. Thank you. Oh, we're adjourned.